The escalating trade war has become a hallmark of President Donald Trump's second term.
We've been ripped off by every country in the world, friend and foe. It's just so unfair for years and years. And now some of that money is going to be coming back to us in the form of tariffs there.
But Trump's on-again, off-again taxes on imports have brewed uncertainty in the economy.
We're going to be announcing pharmaceuticals, chips, and various couple of other things, big ones. We did steel, as you know, they're 50%. We did aluminum, 50%. Lumber just came out.
All that unpredictability has challenged Georgia businesses.
The whiplash of back and forth is disheartening to me because I don't know what to order, when to order, and when I order, I don't know how much my product is going to cost at the end.
And some have had to make hard decisions.
There are other small businesses who left their products at the port because it was so expensive and they just didn't have the money.
Today, we look at how Trump's trade policies are impacting Georgia businesses and consumers.
Also, Georgia's lieutenant governor jumps into the race for governor.
We're going to methodically but responsibly go after the state income tax.
And as some candidates get their 2026 operations up and running, some are loaning their campaigns thousands, even millions of dollars. I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas.
I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali, and this is Plugged In from WABE. A key part of President Donald Trump's economic and political policies are the use of tariffs. And while it is a tool that Trump and other presidents have used in the past, it has become a key part of Trump's agenda here in his second term. Joining us now to talk about those policies and their effects is WABE business reporter Marlon Hyde. Marlon, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Marlon, can you start by explaining what tariffs are and how they're generally implemented? Maybe even give an example.
Tariffs are an import tax on foreign-made goods paid by the importing business to its home country's government. For example, if I'm buying from Canada, then when I collect my goods from a port, I'll have to pay a tax. Economists say the costs tend to be passed on to consumers. And I use Canada as an example. Canada was one of the first countries President Donald Trump targeted when he was signing and announcing tariffs. He placed a rate of 25% on them that later was changed to exempt goods that were covered under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement that Trump actually signed during his first presidential term. He's currently threatening a 35% tariff on non-exempt goods imported from Canada right now.
So in that example, Marlon, that involves placing tariffs on goods from a single country. We've also seen tariffs around specific sectors and specific raw materials.
So aluminum and steel are another example of this. We supply it from Europe and Canada and a few other places as well. Last month, the U.S. doubled tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from 25% to 50%. And why that matters? Earlier this year, Coca-Cola CEO said if aluminum cans become too expensive, the company will pivot away from aluminum and use more plastic and glass packaging. But other companies may not be able to pivot as easily. Take construction, for example. A large portion of construction costs are related to steel and aluminum, so they will be impacted. U.S. steel and aluminum companies raised their prices after the tariffs were announced. So beverage companies, local breweries, construction firms, regardless of whether companies import their materials, they will have to pay more, which will impact us, the consumer, ultimately.
So another challenge around these tariffs is kind of what you talked about with Canada, the on-again, off-again nature of them, whether it's the president doing it or legal challenges. Talk more about that.
Yeah, it kind of feels like, when you get your first girlfriend in like middle school or high school and you break up and now you're back on and you break up again. Like in May, a trade court blocked a bulk of President Donald Trump's sweeping global tariffs. Then within 24 hours, an appeals court decided to keep them in effect while the White House continued to fight the ruling. But yes, many pauses. We've had moments here where I was writing a story about tariffs and it was about to air, then we would have to change it because of a pause, a percentage change, or just something happening that alters the story in which I would have to do my due diligence and correct it.
Now, all of this is having major implications for Georgia. We have major international companies like Coca-Cola, you just mentioned, and significant amounts of international trade that go through Georgia, whether it's through the ports of Savannah and Brunswick, the Atlanta airport. Obviously, we have the I-75, 85, and 95 corridors. So this is a big deal for Georgia.
Georgia port officials say in April, Savannah experienced increased activity as businesses rushed to stock up ahead of President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs and the end of those pauses. Meanwhile, Brunswick saw a 22% year-over-year drop in roll-on, roll-off cargo. That's including cars, machinery, anything with wheels, in that same month. Georgia port officials continue to monitor what's going on at the port. But, when we're talking about big companies like Delta, for example, Delta restored its 2025 outlook. Now, let me tell you why that's significant. An economic outlook for a company is their economic forecast that they're giving to investors so that they know where the company sees themselves for the rest of the year. Delta was like, there's too much economic uncertainty for us to provide you this right now, earlier this year, in one of their first quarter earnings report. Now, in their latest earnings report, they brought it back, citing travel demand stabilizing. They were excited about new trade deals coming aboard, that they felt confident that they could provide a full year outlook for their investors. That's significant.
Now, all of this is also having a big effect on small businesses in Georgia. And you've been looking at the effect on some here in the Atlanta area.
Angela Hawkins, Patrice Hall, and Sherdon Reynolds are all Black women business owners in Atlanta, and they're all great examples of this. Sherdon Reynolds is the owner of She Prints It, a promotional products company that offers services like custom printing, signage, graphic design, and more. Reynolds says materials like blank mugs made in China on average cost between $1 and $3.
In a U.S. version of that would be somewhere between $7 to $9 per unit prior to decoration.
Angela Hawkins runs Bamboo, a company that sells bedding and pajamas made from bamboo fabric.
I use quality bamboo fabrics, and we just don't manufacture that type of fabric in the United States.
She wants to produce in the United States to avoid the tariffs, but she can only get her materials from China. Patrice Hall is another example. Her business, Stuff We Want to Say, is a custom tea and apparel company.
The whiplash of back and forth is disheartening to me because I don't know what to order, when to order, and when I order, I don't know how much my product is going to cost at the end.
So with either challenges around materials or the cost of materials, are some of these businesses in danger of not surviving?
Some businesses are concerned. Economic uncertainty is bad for business. Val Barnett runs Immerse, which sells candles, body butters, and soaps that promote mental health. She says that shipping her products because of tariffs was going to cost her an extra $1,000. That's just to ship the products. And she already has to pay for the products itself.
I know for a fact that there are other small businesses who left their products at the port because it was so expensive and they just didn't have the money to actually, bring it in from the port.
Some have found opportunities, like Terry Nichelle Bradley. She's the owner of Brown Toy Box and recently opened her first brick-and-mortar toy store.
We looked at the political landscape, the social climate, the tariffs, all those things. And we're like, listen, we need to be the masters of our own destiny.
She figured this would be a great time to sell her educational toys that promote cultural representation due to economic uncertainty from tariffs. She was part of a meeting at the Russell Innovation Center for Entrepreneurs, where Black business owners strategized navigating the impacts of economic uncertainty in this trade war.
So, Marlon, what are we hearing from economic officials like, the Georgia Chamber, international diplomats, economic forecasters? I assume we're hearing from a lot of them.
Well, between the Georgia Chamber, international diplomats, and economic forecasters, they're all saying we're going to end up paying more. Economists expect consumers to pay higher prices for the goods that the tariffs are impacting. Some expect job growth to slow, but rebound once we're more used to this environment. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce continues to provide updates to its members in, semi-regular briefings. Port officials continue to monitor impacts and shipping, exporting, and global trends.
And of course, like everything, this has all gotten mired in politics as the president claims Americans will not pay for tariffs, which may be true in the short term as companies absorb or even delay implementing some of these tariffs. But Marlon, what are you hearing long term?
Well, long term is where it gets dangerous, especially for businesses that can't weather the storm. The Small Business Administration recognized Felipe Arojave as the 2024 Exporter of the Year. His business, Spectrum International, manufactures and exports custom-made contact lenses.
If we start fighting the world, there's nothing else that manufacturers in the United States can do but move overseas.
Small businesses that can't afford to move somewhere else will have to make some hard decisions, like whether or not to stay open.
That's WABE business reporter Marlon Hyde. Marlon, you're going to be back again because this story is nowhere near being finished. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing all your reporting.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Let's take a break. You're listening to Plugged In from WABE. Welcome back to Plugged In from WABE.
It was one of the worst-kept secrets in Georgia politics. Republican Burt Jones running for governor. The lieutenant governor made it official last week, and Rahul, you got to talk with him.
That's right. Jones is currently serving in his first term as lieutenant governor, and now is going for the top job as Governor Kemp is term limited. He launched his campaign with an ad.
I'm Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. Let's go for a little ride.
And, remember how we've been talking about the demise of the in-person campaign launch and this focus on that first digital video laying out the case for the campaign and kind of the backstory of the candidate. In this race for governor, for example, we've seen Democratic Senator Jason Estevez on the basketball court, former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms at her kitchen table talking about calls with her grandmother, Republican Attorney General Chris Carr, who's Jones's chief rival in the GOP primary, he had one of these ads too. And here we see Jones driving his truck on a country road, asking voters to join the ride. We also see film of Jones on the football field when he played for the University of Georgia Dogs. Also, so much generic stock footage.
And the ad also includes this first campaign promise.
Number one, we're going to completely eliminate the state income tax.
And so that was one of the first issues I brought up in our conversation.
It's not something that you're going to be able to do overnight, but it is a perfect illustration of how to do it is how we've done it the last 3 years. We've lowered it all 3 years. We're going to continue to lower it. We're going to methodically but responsibly go after the state income tax, and we are going to look at other models that are out there, Florida and Texas.
Jones referring there to the gradual lowering of the state income tax to its current 5.19% for people and corporations, with it set to go down year by year to 4.99%.
I know other states have eliminated the state income tax, but is this really practical here in Georgia?
So let's look at the numbers for the fiscal year 2026 state budget. That's the one that took effect on July the 1st. $19 billion is projected to come from personal and corporate income taxes. That is half of the state budget. So the reality is proponents of eliminating the state income tax are going to have to look at things like the billions in tax credits.
There's some that have been beneficial, but there's some that have not, and so therefore we're going to address those and then lower the income tax accordingly, how we can see best fit. Because, like I said, at the end of the day, we've been incentivizing corporations for a long time. I'd like to see us incentivize individuals.
And look, the most high profile of those is the film tax credit. But let me put something else on people's radar, and it's the idea of whether services in Georgia should be taxed. Look, you don't pay sales taxes for your auto mechanic or your plumber. And as we tape this, we just learned that Lieutenant Governor Jones has appointed a state Senate committee that's going to look at different ways to eliminate or at least lower the state income tax rate.
You also talked to Jones about taxpayer-funded vouchers for private school tuition, a controversial program lawmakers approved in the 2024 legislative session.
So right now we're seeing the rollout of the Georgia Promise Scholarship for the upcoming school year. 2 key points. It's for students who are in schools in the bottom 25%, and it gives $6,500 a year per student. I asked Jones if he wanted to see an expansion of either one of those two things.
I want to see good participation first, Rahul. And yes, obviously, I would like to see it expanded to other opportunities, not just to include failing schools. I think it ought to include more than that. But right now we have get to see exactly how it's going to perform, and I bet you're going to realize a lot of good success stories that will come from it. And it's never meant to be fully funding secondary schools. It is always said this is going to be the state portions, and we want this to be a bridge to help people find other educational needs for their kids.
Rahul, can you talk a little bit about how some of the dynamics of the last legislative session have kind of led up to this race? I mean, remember, as Lieutenant Governor, Burt Jones is the president of the Senate, the leader of that body. Jones got through some of his priority pieces of legislation, but not everything, such as more restrictions on diversity, equity, and inclusion material in schools, and this red tape rollback act that he said was inspired by the Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency.
Yeah, you might remember when Jones stunned colleagues across the hall in the House when he abruptly gavelled out the legislative session hours before the midnight deadline, leaving some House priorities in the lurch. Back to the campaign launch ad, Jones mentioned another issue from the legislative session that I expect to hear about from many Republican candidates.
I'm also going to make sure we keep a ban on biological boys from playing in girls' sports. And if anyone doesn't like that, they can move to California.
Yeah, and as we've covered, we see Republican candidates really leaning into this quote-unquote culture war type of issue, especially around the transgender community. And at this moment of demographic change in Georgia with, transplants coming in, I think it's interesting to kind of hear this nod at preserving traditional Georgia values compared to liberal states like California. In the ad, we also saw Jones really highlighting his relationship with President Trump, angling for, a coveted endorsement ahead of the primary.
Jones has been a longtime supporter of the president. He speaks at Trump rallies. He's had the Trump endorsement. The upside of that is it will help him in the Republican primary, unless another MAGA candidate jumps into the race or for some reason Trump stays out of this race. We've been talking about GOP primary contenders trying to align themselves more closely to either Governor Brian Kemp or Trump. Clearly, we're seeing Jones hitching closely to Trump in this case. The downside of this could be the general election next year if President Trump is not doing well in the polls, along with Jones's role in the 2020 effort to overturn Joe Biden's victory in Georgia.
Yeah, Jones and 15 other Georgia Republicans signed on as false electors in 2020 for Trump after Biden's win and submitted a document to that extent to the National Archives. Jones has said he did nothing wrong and called it a procedural move as court cases played out at that time. Now, 3 of the electors were indicted in Fulton County. A special prosecutor declined to bring charges against Jones.
So here's what Jones told me this week.
And I also don't apologize for what I did, and because I was responding to constituents. So, end of the day, I'm glad that we do have a second Trump presidency, and that is happening right now, and I like everything that's going on with this second term that he has currently.
Now, Sam, there was something else about the Jones campaign launch that jumped out at you, that he had $14 million on hand to start his campaign.
Yeah, that $14 million was such an eye-popping number. I was surprised when I looked under the hood to see $10 million of that was a loan Jones himself made to his campaign. So let's dig into that for a moment. The lieutenant governor is founder of an insurance company and heir to a petroleum distribution business. And so his personal fortune has helped him far outpass his chief primary opponent, Attorney General Chris Carr, who reported $3.5 million in contributions with $2.7 million on hand. To learn more about this, I called up Brendan Glavin. He's with Open Secrets, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit that tracks money in politics. And he told me that loans like this don't run afoul of campaign finance law.
limiting the amount an individual can spend on themselves, you're going to run into constitutional issues.
And he says big personal loans seem to be becoming more common.
A lot of reporting is always this person raised this much and this person raised the most. Most people may not see that a lot of that money came from, the individual themselves.
And it is not just Jones. Former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms loaned her campaign for governor $200,000, allowing her to match competitor Jason Estevez, the Democratic state senator. Both reported then raising about $1.1 million in total. Now, early fundraising is kind of like seed money for nascent campaigns, and Glavin says a big haul also sends a message to potential opponents.
When you get out there early, there still may be people who are thinking about getting in, and then they've got to ask themselves, do I have access to that kind of money?
The candidate chipping in sends a signal to donors, too.
They say, okay, well, the candidate's putting their own money behind this. They're serious about this. Maybe I will cut that check.
Jones can also fundraise through a leadership PAC that allows Georgia's governor, lieutenant governor, and state legislative leaders to accept unlimited contributions. On Thursday, a lawyer for Attorney General Chris Carr's campaign for governor filed an ethics complaint calling for an investigation into where the $10 million loan came from. The complaint noted that Jones's last financial disclosure in 2022 reported a $12 million net worth, but only $700,000 of that was in liquid assets. Carr's campaign says the loan raises serious ethical questions. Jones' campaign spokesperson Kendall Parker called the complaint a weak attempt to get attention. So, Rahul, to sum up, it's still a long way to 2026, but as we reach roughly the halfway point of 2025, the campaign certainly seems to be heating up. And I wonder, do you think the field is set at this point?
We're still waiting to hear, for example, from Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's teased a few times about possibly running for governor, bringing up the elimination of the state income tax. There, of course, is Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. He could jump into this race or jump into the U.S. Senate race. So those are two big names who are still out there possibly running for governor.
That's it for this edition of Plugged In from WABE.
Plugged In is produced by Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick.
Plugged In is available wherever you want to listen. If you listen on demand, make sure to head on over to the dedicated Plugged In feed to subscribe and leave us a rating.
You can also find us on the radio at 90.1 every Friday morning from 9:30 to 10.
And remember, as public media faces an uncertain funding stream, you can support this work with a gift at wabe.org/donate. I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas.
I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali. We'll be back next week.